James Caps, we're here again.
Hey, here
We're
we
live.
are.
We're live
Good to see
together.
you.
Everybody else is not.
Not
We're
living
not live.
together, or nor living together, but we are live
Yeah, we live together, but we record in separate
from different
places. Just
rooms.
to,
It makes it so much easier,
it
right? We
does.
need
It
our
does.
space. Yeah.
So you and I were talking about innovation and just kind of like just the nuances of it and how people talk about it all the
Mhm.
time and what it's related to. And I thought you came up with 3 kind of catchy things about innovation that I thought it would be good for us to talk about today. So what are
Yeah.
those?
Well, I think when especially as a CTO or at that level, you really need to remember that a lot of the things that get people into technology is the actual nerdy tech. But I think the 3 things to remember are: one, every problem is actually a people problem, right? And so as technologists, let's not forget that. 2, during an outage, you got to fix the tech, but you got to go that next step and fix the people part, right? So during an outage, fix the tech first, fix the people second. And then the third item when it comes to innovation, which is, we always have to remember this, that ego is always a key ingredient in innovation. And like, salt and chocolate chip cookies, it can be a good thing and a bad thing. So you have to be thoughtful about that when you think about ego. So let's dig into those so I can explain it. But I think that those are 3 great takeaways when we look at innovation and try to look at it from a different slice, which is, hey, let's just not the coolest, let's do the coolest thing. There's another perspective on it.
Yeah. All right. Let's start at the top. Let's talk about every problem is a people problem. And really, what do you mean by that first?
I use this phrase all the time. I probably used it on the show a couple of times. That a friend of mine is a high school principal, and she always says this place would run great if it wasn't for these damn kids. And so the reality is that everything that we do, is every job and every work company we work for, by and large, it's operated by the people. And so when you look at problems, no matter what they are, the people are the common denominator, and we have to remember that. And whether you have a bug in your code or you have a performance issue with your server, there's a people element to that, whether it's the design of that server or that server farm, the design of that code, the ops team and how they responded to that. Was your call center available? So those problems are all people problems. And I think, to be blunt, my success in my role is because I'm really much better at the people part than I am the technology part. I'm not detail oriented enough to remember and be really good coder, but I get the people part. And so if I'm a nerd with people skills, that is actually more of a uniqueness in the space. And so I think as leaders, if we remember to that, people are a key element in everything, and people are every problem's a people problem, we'll probably get to the core of the issue faster.
Yeah. So what comes to mind for me is like, how do you identify those people problems? So like when you have a plan and you have a goal for integrating a certain innovation or technology, it's like when it gets stalled or when you miss deadlines, you like go to first, why is that? What's impeding that success? And then the other piece of it is when you can't make a decision on what is the right innovation moving forward, I wonder how that impedes. Is it my idea? Are those things,
Right.
how is that not moving forward?
Well, I think that that's the third item on that list, which is, ego is always
Ego,
part of
true.
it. And we've all been there where, somebody isn't willing to invest in the servers, or somebody doesn't feel like the product needs updated or whatever. And yeah, sure, there's financial issues and risk issues, but there's so many times that people just don't want to have their cheese moved. They're comfortable with the way things are. Rarely does a new executive come in and be hesitant to change the code because they have some sort of affinity to it. Ego and comfort are always part of these innovation questions, and you have to, as a leader, I think it's super important that you allow that to be part of the conversation, but also acknowledge it. You'll find that people who especially technologists who have put a lot of sweat equity into, a piece of software, a system, a solution, a process, they're less likely to want to change that. And that's just a subconscious
Yeah.
bias, I think. There is that investment mentality that we've put so much time and effort into it, and you need to work through that. And back to the people part of it is you can't just say you're wrong and put a bullet in your code and move on. You need to bring those people along. And
Hmm.
so, that's got to be a part of the conversation of yes, I acknowledge the fact that you did a great job and worked really hard on this, but we have to make a decision. And so, always remember that there's egos in play.
Yeah.
They always aren't on this. Not every technologist wears it on their sleeve, but they're there. There's pride. There's ownership. You want people that have pride and ownership and passion around that, but at the same time, it does and can inhibit innovation.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think like tactically when you're in the moment and
Mhm.
I think when ego gets involved or as a leader trying to figure out how to get people to see it objectively, it's kind of that zooming out
Yep.
because emotions are involved. When
Sure.
ego's involved and you're like frustrated, there's research that shows that emotion impedes our ability to
Yes.
think straight.
Yes.
So what are
Right.
some of the things that you do to make sure that you get that
Mhm.
objective view and kind of step out of the moment? And then how can you help your people also do that too?
Especially as a new leader, I think the easiest thing you can do is just simply acknowledge that that your team did put a lot of work into this, and that there is pride in it. One of the things that I found really resonates with folks is, oftentimes you'll open up a technology, a product, you open up the patient, and you look inside, and you're like, what? This is so dumb. Why would you do that? And obviously with hindsight is 2020, you would never do this. You would never test on prod or whatever the nerd thing is that they made a mistake doing. But if you take a moment and acknowledge the fact that some genius made that decision 5 years ago because
Yeah.
of constraints and things you can't possibly appreciate. And if you go and say, look, this thing is a Frankenstein product, but my God, you guys worked so hard on this and managed to do this with $2 and a stick of gum.
Yeah.
Now that gives them pride, acknowledges the work that they did, and then you can bring them on and say, isn't it time for us to move beyond that? But if you look at it through today's lens, of course you're going to be biased. And then what you're doing is you're telling everyone that their baby is ugly.
Yeah.
And that's a real thing. And so I found that if I acknowledge the genius that came with those bastardizations, those bad decisions that came with influences and inputs that you can't remember, can't understand, or the situations that, well, you just don't remember. Roger was such a bad manager; he made us do it. You bet, that's real. We've all been
Yeah.
there. We've all had to do stupid things due to time constraints, funding constraints, etc. So
Yeah.
that acknowledgement, that respect, I think, of the journey is what allows you to bring people along with you.
Yeah. But I want to identify a risk because once you're in that kind of mind share, and if it is a long project, it's hard to not, you want to keep the belief
It
going.
Sure, I guess it depends on the situation. Obviously, I think the goal, ultimately one of the things you and I talk about is, where does passion, where does, as a leader, how much emotional engagement should you really have, and do you get caught up in the chaos? And sure, acknowledging that product was built for all the right reasons, even though it's a crappy product, you can succumb to that and say, well, let's just leave it. But that's your job as a leader, is to take those inputs and have an objective point of view and realize that you have a long-term game. You have to play the long game.
Yeah.
And that could include eliminating people who have too much passion for their legacy product, which I have done, where my lead developer refused to throw away the code he wrote in 1975 because you have no idea how much time I put into that, James.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's just
It's
that
hard.
happens.
Yeah.
But I think our job as executives, as leaders, is to maintain that objective perspective and maintain that gap
Yeah.
between an emotional engagement and emotional awareness.
Yeah. There is such a psychology and not being a coder or understanding that. I think
Hmm.
about it. If I had
Hmm.
to apply it to a grocery store scenario, it's like when you get in line and you're in line, it's a long line, and then there's like five people
Hmm.
behind you. And then all of a sudden you realize I was supposed to get barbecue potato chips. You don't want to get out of the line because you've invested
That's
time
right.
and
Right.
you're in
Right.
it. And
Right.
there's such a psychology around that. And
Yes.
so that's the layman's way of Like that
Wow.
investment. Yeah, you're
Yes,
welcome.
yeah, that's good. I mean, I've never heard anybody compare software development or technology to grocery stores in that way, but it's exactly right. And I think people tend to overstate the investment. I think there's an investment bias.
Yeah.
I'm sure some of our listeners will be sending us tweets about the
Yeah.
actual name of this psychology, but it does. You misunderstand and misrepresent the investment made, and as a leader, I think it's our job to just eliminate or avoid worrying about those sunk costs. Yes, we
Yeah.
spent $1 billion on that server in 1980. I don't care. It's not
Yeah.
working. If it was $1 billion or $4, the outcome's the same. It's
Yeah.
not working.
Yeah.
And you have to step away from that and move forward.
Yeah. Definitely a sunk cost.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about, you and I have lived through a lot of outages. Like I think of
Oh,
outages,
sure.
or fixing an issue
Oh,
and
yeah.
how that
Yeah.
feels in the moment, especially if there's urgency involved. And so talk about your
Yeah.
second one, the
Yeah. Yeah.
repeat it during.
Yeah, during an outage or during a crisis, I think is the way I described it.
Yeah.
During a crisis, solve the crisis, but don't forget the people part. And I think as a guy in the software space, so often you're running around and you fix the code and then you move on because there's something else. But 9 times out of 10, the people are part of that equation.
Yeah.
We had a recent issue where our software did not respond as it should have to a stimulus and input, and it was $1 billion error. And we fixed the code so it won't do it again. But the reality was that the users didn't behave like we thought they were going to.
Mm-hmm.
So it was easy to say the code was broken. But we also said, hey, we had to go back and say, hey, user, don't use the pencil for that. Don't stick that pencil in your eye. That's a bad idea. And at the end of the day, the customer was saying, well, make sure our people don't put the pencil in their eye. You can't fix stupid, but the reality is there's a technology part of it and there's a people
Yeah.
part of it. Now that's more of an operational process, but it's also other things like requirements gathering and how do you gain understanding of the outage and how it occurred? How do you
Yeah.
make sure that the command center or your call center or your triage group responds correctly? So yes, you can put the fire out, but then you've got to take a step back
Yeah.
and say, how did the fire start? Who's responsible for the fire? Should we be playing with matches? And that, I think, is the thing that a lot of us forget, is that when during a crisis that you got to address the people element as much as you need to address the urgency.
Yeah. And what I love about this conversation is the tie to people and
Yeah. Yeah.
leadership. And it all comes down to, you can't innovate without being really having a EQ that's
Yes.
pretty in tune to
Yep.
what's going
Yep.
on around you.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that, a technologist without that kind of people approach can't be successful. I think we have people like Steve Jobs and others who were not those great people, but great people. But I think those are the noisy outliers.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is, in the world that we live in, where we're not trying to put a man on the moon, we're trying to just deploy the next piece of our CRM code. That there's a huge part of this which is a people part, and I think at
Yeah.
a senior level, you and your directs have to remember that the people part is as much as part of your innovation strategy as anything else. It isn't just a buzzword. It isn't just a mission
Mhm.
statement looks good on a coffee cup. You have to make sure that you are looking at the people part of it if you are truly going to innovate.
Yeah. Love it. Great discussion. I think this was
Good
really,
topic.
yeah, this was a good one. So until next time, I think
All right.
that was a good one.
All right. Thanks, Susie. Take care.
It's a wrap. Bye.
Bye.